which is a big, big topic. So we want to thank you once again for coming here. And I don't know where all the rest of the people went to tonight, but they're missing. So anyway, let's have a word of prayer, then we'll get started. Dear Father, we thank you, as always, for being our God. And we know you've been leading us, and your Holy Spirit has been teaching us. And we know it's a lot to learn, Father, so really need your help. And pray you be with Jim tonight as he gives us another lesson. Amen.
Thank you very much. I am a cancer survivor. 26 years ago, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. Likely because I was raised on a ranch, where most nights we cooked T-bone steaks over the coals in the fireplace. Those coals are around 5,000 degrees in temperature. When you drip fat on temperatures that elevated, you make hundreds, thousands of chemicals that are bad for you. Charcoal, wood coals, it doesn't matter. So I had surgery. Now, I don't know how familiar you might be with this. I won't tell you too much. But when they remove the prostate, they take it and put it in a little glass, much bigger than this glass. It's filled with chemical, and it's colored blue, the chemical is. And they drop the prostate in there. And then after a while, they take it out. It goes to the lab, the laboratory, where they freeze it and then slice it into hundreds of very, very thin slices. And the physician, depending on what his or her level happens to be, will take the microscope and scan back and forth on every one of those pieces. And they can see the tumor very easily, and they can see the edge of the surgery because it's colored blue. Where did it get that blue color from? That blue in the jar that they put the surgical specimen in. Are you all with me on that? So it happens that I have memorized the report about that study, and here's what it said in part. The adenocarcinoma closely approached the inked surgical margin. No transection was appreciated. It was a lot before and a lot after. What does it mean it closely approached the inked surgical margin? It means that they didn't, and there was no transection. There was no cutting through the tumor. So they got it all. Is that correct? You ever heard that before? They got it all. That is virtually never the case. Long before the tumor is big enough to be imaged or palpated, touched if you will, cells begin to leave that cancer tumor and travel around the body. So I'm sorry to tell you this. They get it all is never the case. Because by the time the tumor is big enough to be diagnosed, cancer cells have already left. Now, I was aware of that, of course. It was about 5 years before I started having some symptoms, and when I went to see the physician, sure enough, there was cancer growing in that area because they didn't get it all. Are y'all with me in what I'm describing? It's not good news to hear, but I think we need to understand that the issue really is not surgery. The issue is prevention. Would you say correct? That's the main focus this evening. And it's not perfect, but it's it's a very important and useful area to become familiar with. What can I do about it? By the way, that was kind of a bad day when I heard they hadn't got it all. Are you with me on that? Sure. And eventually, they did find a tumor growing right where my prostate had been. So there was a few cells or whatever that got away, and even though they got the whole tumor, they didn't get the cells, the cancer cells that left. And eventually, that tumor got about the size of that. And my urologist sent me to a place in California where they used radiation to destroy that little tumor. Now, all of you are familiar with the idea, I'm quite certain, that one of the ways that physicians try to get a feel for whether some man might be at risk for prostate cancer is to measure a substance that the prostate makes. And that substance leaves the prostate and travels around in the blood. So you can measure that and see if there's very much of that. The name escapes me at the moment. All of you know what the name of it is. I'm sorry, what? 1% at all. No, too many people are saying it. Prostate-specific antigen. And thank you for that. When you get to be as old as I am, you'll understand that you can forget stuff that you know until a little later, and then it jumps out. In any case, you understand, friends, that since they got the whole tumor, if they ever find PSA in my blood, it is a cancer cell. Is that fair enough? Took about 5 years, but finally there was PSA. For the first years after the surgery, PSA was 0. At least it was below what you could measure. That's another factor in the world of science, of measuring things. You can look for something, it's there, but maybe your test isn't sensitive enough to find it. You're following what I'm describing? But finally it was non-zero. That was kind of a sad day for me, even though I knew it was coming. And it has been increasing ever since. But my urologist, I was quite amazed, because this is not taught in medical school. He said to me, Jim, you will never die of prostate cancer. Even though the level of PSA, and let me just make sure this is clear, those PSA particles are cancer particles. Is that correct? Y'all with me on that? Even though they're increasing in number. He says, Jim, you're never going to die of prostate cancer. Well, he's not a prophet, but I appreciate that. And but here's the reason why. He took the trouble to find out what kind of a person I was and how I was living. And when he learned that I was on a plant regimen, he was well enough informed. I was quite amazed that the growth of the cancer would be so slow it would never kill me. Isn't that interesting? I wish you were more responsive in your responses to me.
Sounds good to me.
Is that why you guys were all late tonight? So, very interesting. And the PSA is high enough now that he finally sent me to have a special test, very expensive test. And the complications, as a physicist, I would love to tell you a lot about this, but they have a special kind of scanning device that can even detect one cell of cancer. And even though the PSAs are high, they cannot find any cancer in my body. So that's good news to me. One day I'm going to get a new body, those of you who are believers know what I'm talking about. And there won't even be any unwanted PSA in that body. I think you're aware of that. So the presentation is way too long tonight for me to do the complete thing. I'll do as much as I can. But the whole issue actually boils down to, folks, prevention from the way you live. And it's to a great degree from what you eat or do not eat. And so when we talk about a plant regimen, it's a very big issue, friends, with all kinds of cancer. A very big issue for prevention and making the cancer grow slow. So the challenge is it's caused by a combination, something we call a carcinogen, something that causes cancer. Please notice this rest of this little paragraph, altering, or if you will, changing your DNA. There is no exception to this. All cancer is the result of changing the DNA. Now, when you and I are born, we are born with, as you know, a complete copy of our mother and father's DNA. And their DNA may well have cancer-producing sections. So it's an amazing situation that we face as human beings. We call these changes in the DNA, I think you all know this long ladder, 300 billion plus, 200 billion plus rungs. And by the way, just for fun, if you take a certain section of that DNA, what will that section do for your body? Do you remember? I said it coded for something. Does that help you a little bit? What does that section of DNA do then? What does it code for? No, not true. It codes for a specific protein. Does that sound familiar? Did I tell you that your own body makes every protein you need? We do not use the proteins we eat as they are. We take them all apart and use the pieces to make our own proteins. And all cancer is the result of an alteration in the DNA, which make proteins, which can, in some cases, then be carcinogens and cause cancer. Then there's also something you have to have called a promoter, something, a substance, if you will, which makes that cancer cell grow. And one of the things we will do with our plant regimen is avoid all kinds of promoters. Very interesting situation there. And that's why my urologist said to me, Jim, you're never going to die of prostate cancer, because he knows that a whole plant regimen will make it almost impossible for my body to make cancer from those little tiny cancer pieces that were there in that tumor. This is an actual photograph of a cancer cell and a killer T cell. How many of you have ever heard of something called a killer T cell? Good for you, about 80% of you. And that killer T cell will actually bore a hole in the cancer cell, and that will cause fluid to flow in that shouldn't and fluid to flow out that shouldn't. The cancer cell will die. This is an actual photograph after this killer T cell at the bottom of the screen makes a hole in the cancer cell. Let's hear it for killer T cells, right? Now here is a diagram in a magazine that I actually took years ago when this was first discovered, trying to describe how this works. So the target cell is the cancer cell, and this is the killer T cell with some interesting little packages. We'll take a look at that. And when the killer T cell is done, then the target cell, the cancer cell. Now, killer T cells may kill other cells that are problems for us. We're talking about cancer cells right now. So the author is calling it a target cell. You understand, I'm sure, what that means. Can you see what's going on here? What's this dotted line mean? I can't hear you. The killer T cell has made a bunch of holes in the target cell. And that target cell will die. So that's the story there in the destruction of the cancer cell. Now, this is a close-up just for the sake of interest. We are fearfully and wonderfully made, friends. It is just astonishing. The killer T cell makes these little balls. They actually look like a little cell. Can you see the double wall of fatty particles here? And in fact, this is the wall of the killer T cell. Can you see the double layer of fatty cells, right? And the target cell. And the killer T cell makes these granules, scientists have decided to call them. And inside are some proteins that the killer T cell makes. And when this granule touches the edge of the cell that is in, you know, remember when you played with bubbles and you have two bubbles and suddenly they become one? It's the very same mechanism that happens right here, and that ball, that granule, suddenly is open, and the stuff that's in it pours out in between the cells. You all with me on that so far? And the killer T cell has fastened itself carefully here and here, so these particles do not get away, but simply bore these holes in the target or the cancer cell. Got it? Isn't that amazing? And what happens is these little red particles that scientists have decided to call perforins, where did they get that word from? Perforate. When they get near each other, let's say that my hand is one, another, they tend to hook up at an angle. So when you get a bunch of them together, what do you make? A hole, right? And that's the mechanism. These proteins, these perforin proteins that the cell manufacturers are designed to do that, and you can see, can you not, the beginning of the hole, and then more of it, and then you can actually see the holes. Are you all with me on that? Pretty interesting, wouldn't you say? Starting with one, and then a few more. Now, something else is going on here. These particles can turn around and cut holes in the killer T cell. So it carefully fastens itself in a very small area on either side where it's going to bore some holes and protects itself from getting killed by its own particles. Very interesting. Same thing a little closer up. And you could spend a couple hours minimum listening to someone lecture on why does this not always work? Why does this suppression not always work? And there are these different reasons that we know of, and probably many more. So your body kills a lot of cancer cells. All of us, friends, our bodies have killed cancer cells, but on rare occasions, fortunately it's fairly rare, the body gets behind and doesn't get this all done. I'm not going to go through this. The one might be interested. One of the problems is an anatomical barrier that keeps the chemical reactions that take place between the killer T cell and where it's trying to target. And in this case, it's overweight. Did you know that overweight is one of the very large risk factors for cancer? Did you know that? What percent of Americans are overweight? It's around 80%. It's amazing, friends. And it causes many problems. But one of the scary ones, of course, would be this issue with cancer. And there's other more sophisticated chemical pathways that scientists have discovered why the killer T cells are not always able to do their job, unfortunately. Now, what about prevention? Well, normal weight, I mentioned that already. In fact, what's the highest risk factor for cancer? Overweight. Isn't that something? And it's especially because it inhibits circulation. Folks, if you could underline something that made sense for good health for almost anything in our bodies, it would be better circulation. Got it? And so this overweight is a huge problem with circulation. And if you will get on a plant regimen, I was going to say I could guarantee it. Now, you can cheat on a plant regimen, I suppose, but I'm telling you, folks, get on a regimen of plants only, and you'll be blessed in many, many different ways. Activity. What's so good about activity in this context? Circulation. Every vein in your body. In fact, I have a friend, we were in college together, physician. He's a peripheral vascular surgeon. And one time we were talking about these things, He said, Jim, every vein in your body and mine has little one-way valves every distance or so. Every vein, the big ones and the tiny ones. So whenever you move in any way at all, it squeezes on these veins. In fact, every step you take pumps, I forget the number, I think it's about 8 ounces of blood, pumps up your leg into your body. Every step. It's amazing. You understand, when you squeeze that vein, the blood can only go what? In one direction. And it goes, if you will, against gravity. That's the way we were designed. Whatever you move. I'm talking. Are there veins in my jaw? Is it improving my circulation? Yes. Activity is huge, friends. And please, if you're not doing enough, consider working on a way to do more. Smoking, big issue, as you know, in cancer. And Neve and I have had the privilege, we have helped several thousand people quit smoking. And we've done these 6-day programs where we rent we've done it on our property more recently, but we used to rent some camp somewhere and advertise. We'd have sometimes 30, 40, 50 smokers show up. And we would keep them there on the camp. They could leave anytime they wanted. There was no issue to try to hold them there, but it was rare. Once in a while, one of them would give up and leave. But it's a huge issue with cancer, as you probably well know. One of the most important preventions of cancer is doing colonoscopies. I have about 4, 5 close friends and close friends, who are gastroenterologists. And I have visited with them for hours about these topics. It is so important, friends. I think probably all of you are, getting this done. But don't avoid this. It's no fun. You have to drink that gallon, and it cleans you out like you've never been cleaned out in your life. But it's important. A whole plant regimen, especially soy. Now, haven't you heard that soy is bad for you? That is so false, folks. I want to just scream. Now, it happens that the man who is the world's authority on soy, you may have a hard time believing all of this, but I've been in this work for so many years, friends. He and I are friends. And he is the author of several books on soy, showing how valuable a plant it is. You don't have to eat soy, but it's especially useful in preventing cancer. So the idea that it's bad for you. I don't know if I should take the time to do this, but some people have heard, especially the females, that breast cancer is increased, or the rate of growth is increased. And there are a couple of receptors. Do you know that word? That there's some evidence that maybe if soy connected to that, maybe it would make this cell replicate. And so soy got this very bad reputation, which I actually have an article about 10 pages long that shows a huge amount of research that has been done on the men, particularly in the media world, not media like writing, but in that part of the world. And soy has been shown among these men to be a wonderful prevention for cancer. And we finally learned that there are some other receptors that when soy hooks to them, helps make that soy not be susceptible to cancer. So forget all of this malarkey that people say that soy is bad for you. It's good for you like any plant. Yes. Oh, allergy is a different issue. If you're allergic to something, you probably shouldn't use it. However, let me just say, however, it depends on the level of a response you might get, and if something would be helpful for you, even if you were slightly allergic to it, you might want to consider using it. But it's been very clear that soy does not promote cancer growth. That's just a completely false idea. Alcohol-free, even one drink, friends, will increase our risks for cancer. And then every single drink after that. It's a huge issue. Diabetes, pre-diabetes. Do you remember, I actually have a slide, I'm going to have to go there. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Late menarche. When a child, and I'll show you a slide on this, when a female child starts menstruating, if it's early in that child's life, the chance of cancer in that child's life is much higher. I don't know if you gals are familiar with that, but and one day one of my professors put a really interesting graph he drew on the board, which I'm going to show you, so I'll get there. I'm sure most of you women are familiar with the fact that breastfeeding or a first child early in life, all those things help prevent cancer. And of course, as you know, virginity and monogamy are issues there with sexually transmitted diseases. Now, I think that slide is going to be next here. No, it isn't. I'll have to try to find it. I thought I stuck it in here. Let me take a quick look. There it is. Since I'm talking about it, I'll go back to where I was in a minute. Dr. Mervyn Harding. I could talk to you about this man for half a day. One of my professors in graduate school. He was an MD, and he was practicing his first year out of medical school, and somebody at the medical school where he had graduated died. And the dean of the medical school called Mervyn up and said, "We are desperate. Would you please come teach in the medical school?" So he gave up practicing medicine. He actually eventually got 2 more degrees. I thought I had them on here. He got a PhD in nutrition at Harvard, and he got a PhD in pharmacology from Stanford. And to sit at this man's feet was just about as high a prize as any science student ever would want to have. I got to know him very well. One day, now this is a story, there's no time for this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. One day, Neva and I went to a big church up there near Spokane. A friend was preaching there, and we decided to skip our church and go there. And we're sitting there, kind of halfway through the early services, and finally a guy walks out. It was Mervyn's son. He and I are friends. And he gave a little talk, a little health talk between the early and the later service. And I don't know, 10, 15 minutes later, less than that maybe, suddenly there was a tap on my shoulder. Neva and I were about halfway up the aisle, and I turned around, and it was him. He saw us sitting out there, and he came to say hello, and he sat down for a second, and I said, "How are you? How's your dad? Is your dad still?" "Oh, yes, he's fine. He's here today." I said, "No." And I want to talk to him. "Is that okay?" He said, "He's over there in the back." So I got out and walked around there, and I went back in there and sat down beside Mervyn Harding. And I said, "Dr. Harding, you probably wouldn't remember me, but I've been your student through the years." "Oh," he says, "Jim, I remember you." The guy is about 98, right? And he says, I remember you. He said, you guys had that restaurant in Seattle. He said, I remember eating there, and so forth and so on. So here is Mervyn Harding, the best of the best as far as teachers are concerned, in my opinion. Just a wonderful guy, not to mention, look at how much information this guy has, given his education. And so he gets up that day in graduate school for me and a number of physician friends studying nutrition, and he draws on the board, oh, he got a Doctor of Health Science degree besides, that's right. And he put this diagram on the board. And what you have on this axis, I think you all are comfortable with that word, on this line of measuring from 0 to a lot is how much protein someone is eating. And on this line is just how long they're living. Y'all with me so far? And what he said was, look, puberty is represented by this line. This is childbearing years. This is menopause for females, and this is death. And the idea is that the earlier you get into puberty, that I should say, if you reach puberty at too young of an age, you understand this is 0 age and this is increasing age. Are y'all with me on that? If you get into puberty at a younger age than, say, later, do you understand what I'm drawing when I do this? What's the case? More protein caused that to happen. And you might say, well, is that good or bad? Maybe not. But here's the problem. What happens to death, friends, when we have high protein intakes? What's this mean? What's this line mean? You have a shorter lifespan just because of eating so much protein. Who eats a lot of protein? Americans. Americans are told that they need to get more protein, are they not? Completely false, folks. It's a problem for a number of reasons. And Dr. Harding was just trying to help us get a grasp on this thing. And I don't know if I should labor this, friends. If there's a guy in the world or a person in the world you could trust with information, don't you think it would be Mervyn Harding? You understand what I'm saying? Amazing story. And the privileges I've had of sitting at the feet of people like him. Now, interestingly enough, my wife and I, about 2 years after we married, started following the lifestyle we're talking to you about. We learned it from a couple of physician friends. I think you may remember I mentioned that. And I was very curious to know, because 2 years after that, or was it a little more than that, we had our first child, our first daughter, Kathy. And as she was growing up in years of life, what do you suppose I was interested in watching? I wanted to know when she started menstruating in terms of the lifestyle that we put her on. And even though she's nursing, is that a whole plant regimen? Well, indirectly it is, isn't it? And sure enough, she didn't start menstruating until she was 16 years old. What's the average today in America? Oh, listen, it's below 10 years. It's incredible. And what about menopause? That's going to be earlier, which actually in some ways could be healthy. But this girl is probably going to have a nice long lifespan. Then her sister came along a little over 2 years later. Same thing. Late menarche, if you will, based on the whole plant regimen that they were getting. All right, let's pass this up quickly. I think I've talked long enough about that one. But let me just ask you folks, are you getting the point? Good. Now, if you take a human cell, we used to do this in the lab, scrape a little skin off and put it in a dish, put it in a warm place, and it'll start growing because there were some germs on there, some bugs of some kind. And those cells can divide many, many times before they finally quit copying themselves. But a cancer cell will continue dividing itself forever. So, very interesting problem. Our regular cells will eventually, after they're asked to divide too many times, if you scratch yourself too many times in that spot and it bleeds and months, eventually it will not heal anymore. You understand why? Because the cells finally will not divide to heal the wound, just to call something to your attention. So the real truth about soy, the elders of Okinawa have repeatedly been shown to be the healthiest and longest lived people in the world. Those are the people that I was referring to a few minutes ago. This was demonstrated, what? Talk to me, friends. Conclusively in the renowned Okinawa Centenarian Study, 25-year-long study sponsored by the Japanese Ministry of Health. The researchers conducting the study analyzed the diet and health profiles of the elders and concluded that the high consumption of soy is one of the what, friends? Main reasons that Okinawans are at extremely low risk for hormone-dependent what? Cancers. Go home, folks, and have some soy. But don't buy it in the packages where they put a lot of other stuff with it, right? Amazing story, friends. The researchers conducting the study analyzed the diet and the health profiles of Okinawan elders. They concluded that the high soy consumption is one of the main reasons, extremely low risk for cancers of the breast, prostate, ovaries, and colon especially. Amazing story. Compared to North Americans, they have a staggering 80% less breast cancer rate and prostate cancer than Americans, and less half the ovarian cancer and colon cancer. And these researchers decided that it was because of their intake of soy. This enormously reduced cancer risk arises in part, they say, from the Okinawa's large consumption of isoflavones from soy. The lowest cancer rates in the world are found among the people who eat the most soy. Other studies have confirmed the link between soy consumption and reduced risk. The Japan Public Health Center study found the lowest risk breast cancer rates in women who ate the most soy products. Amazing story, friends. Recent study in the Lancet journal, women who ate the most flavonoids had a substantially lower risk of breast cancer. Perhaps most tellingly, a huge study published in the National Cancer Institute in 2003 found that women with a high intake of soy reduced their the risk of breast cancer by what, friends? Call it half. Cut it in half in comparison to women who had a low intake of soy. Michael Greger, now write this down in your mind, if not on your paper. That's a source, a very reliable source. Every once in a while somebody will say to me, well, how do you know this? Well, the answer is it's in the literature. But this is something you can get your hands on very easily. Just Google Michael Greger. He has about 100 people working for him, and that team of people and he himself, he's a physician but a scientist as well, read every scientific paper in the world that's done on diet and lifespan. And they analyze them, and he reports almost daily on some new thing, an additional thing. I often listen to him. You can not only Google and see what he's published today, but you can, of course, put in what topic you might want to be looking at. This is a place that you can trust what is being done. And these people that work for him are scientists. They're not just people that just he hired off the street. They sifted through the study's bottom paragraph, and it turns out that this is interesting, only the unfermented soy does this. Tofu and soy milk consumption was associated with about a 30% reduction in risk, whereas there didn't appear to be any protection linked to fermented soy food. Is that something you should make a note of? Yeah. Plain soy. Cooked is fine, but not fermented. Oh, I should ask the ladies. Neva? You're supposed to have this to make comments all the time, dear.
Usually in the produce section in the grocery store, kind of down at the end.
A block, you
where
can
they
buy a
have-
block of it, right, at a
Yeah,
time?
it's, well, a 1 pound in a little white carton with a little, in water. You pour off the water, you're probably familiar with it. And I think the fermented is a special, the tempeh, it's been flavored with like a type of soy sauce that's fermented. Soy sauce is fermented. And I'm not sure, it just gives it a flavor, and I don't ever use it because it's more expensive. I just get the regular.
Not only that, it's more bad for you. Okay. Yes.
I'm 79 years old. I weigh 200 pounds. I consume approximately 100 grams a day of protein from various sources. My question to you is, based upon what the chart that you put up a little while ago and what you said, do I extend my life by cutting my protein intake?
Yes. The idea that you need more protein is completely false. It is bad for you. Is that a better microphone?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you don't just have to trust me. Any one of these people I've referred to, they'll all tell you the same thing. And of course, look at the studies done over there. Yeah. It's crazy that Americans are told they need more protein. It's bad for you. Okay? Or eat a lot of it. Bad for you. So, and of course, we get a lot of it just from eating animal products, which we should learn to lay aside. I was raised on a ranch, folks. I understand what it means to walk away from all those T-bone steaks. Believe me. I know what it's like. Can you get cure? Occasionally. But it's a tough call, as all of you know. 5-year survival rates, we still use that. We say, well, you probably have 5 years left or something like that. There can be immune therapy that's targeted. There's all kinds of things going on today. Natural therapies, not so good, even though all of us are inclined to say, what can I do naturally? Of course, eating these foods we're talking about is a natural therapy. Juicing, raw foods, this is a big topic. I'm going to tell you this. I'm sorry, I have to keep getting stuff, folks, that's not in my notes. I was asked one time to do a lecture on raw or cooked food in terms of how good it was. And I thought I knew the answer. And actually, I'm getting myself mixed up with two topics, but they're very similar. One, I know I shouldn't do this, but here we go. One was GMO foods. I was asked to do a lecture on that. And in both cases, I thought I knew the answers, but I called up half a dozen friends. And the guy that's last on my list is the guy that I probably respect. I have so many of these people, though, that are such outstanding people in their fields. But because I worked with Neil Nedley for a whole year, person by person, working under him, as I told you, I was the boss of this big company out there in California, this lifestyle program. And I always end up talking to him at the last. And these were his words, both about GMO, and you may want to get up and walk out when I tell you this, and about this issue, with raw and cooked. He said, Jim, I don't think it's a problem, and I don't think it ever will be. If you like it raw, fine. If you like it cooked, fine. When you heat something, are there certain things in there because of the heat that are broken apart? Sure. But it's not an issue in terms of lifestyle and health and so forth. But there are people who make a very big point out of one or the other, isn't that right? Especially raw. But it's without basis if you talk to the real professionals that know. The same thing. These were Neil's exact words. He said, Jim, I don't think it's a problem, and I don't think it ever will be. I would love to take an hour to tell you why. I could do that, but I'm just telling you what. And then I called the medical director. I used to be his boss. He's a physician there at Weimar. And I said, Clarence, what do you think? He said the same thing. Jim, it's not an issue. So I'm so fortunate, folks, to have these friends. By the way, the guy that wrote the book, I didn't finish the story. What part of the story was it that I was telling you? He wrote the book on soy, and he was there, again, a whole bunch of scientists, 400 people of us, and I had the temerity, can you believe this, to raise my hand and ask this question. And then after, clarify something. And then after people were almost all gone, I was back there talking with the guy who wrote the book. And he said, Jim, just before I came here to Loma Linda to give this lecture today, he said I was back in the Midwest and I gave a lecture to the, how would we describe them? There's a good word for it. To the people who are in charge of cooking all the foods for institutions, the dietitians. And he said, so here's his book. And he had a couple of boxes, and they were gone just like that among all of these scientists that were listening. He said, you know how many books I sold there? I said, no. He said, 1. That's where the dietitians in this country are in the training they get. Now, don't throw rocks at them, because the average person is never going to do what I'm telling you ought to do. Is that correct? I hope you're different. So don't throw rocks at them. They're just not going to do it. And it's for a good reason. The people in the hospital, these dietitians are writing down what they should have at this particular point in their recovery. Are they trying to help that person get well? Of course, as best they know, right? So I don't even throw rocks at them. But the next thing is, are people going to go home and do this? I wonder sometimes why I even take the time to give these lectures, because it's amazing. My wife and I have conducted, I think I mentioned this, on our own property after I retired 29 years ago. Retired for working for a salary. We built these cottages on our property up there, and we have done 54 6-day live-in programs with people that came to our property and lived with us for a week. I do 3 lectures a day. She does cooking demonstrations. She prepares all the food for them and me and her for that whole week. And all of them, they get well, and they're going to do it for sure. And guess what percentage of them go home and do it long term? Lucky to get 1 out of 10. So sometimes I wonder, will I ever lecture to a group like this where everybody will go home and do it? Raise your right hand and repeat after me. Yes, please. Glyphosates. Glyphosates. Yeah, a good topic. And again, I was asked to do a lecture on that. It's really GMO that we're talking about. And I asked about 5 physician friends and 3 other scientists. One of them was the head of the nutrition department at a big university, all friends of mine. They all said the same thing. It's not an issue. It's a big blow up. It's just, who knows? If there was another night, I wouldn't let you ask questions unless you came up here, because I can't hear you talking well enough. But talk to me afterwards with that last question, because I couldn't quite get every word you said. All these things I put on the screen helpful? Yes. Fever treatments. Hyperbaric, hard to measure that one. Probably helpful. Supplements, probably helpful. Several physician friends of mine use them. Turmeric, quite for sure helpful. Resveratrol, all of these things you've heard about. But the best thing, folks, is not to worry about buying this and buying that. The best thing is just to use a whole plant regimen, right? And don't worry about if you get enough of this or enough of that. Just eat plants. there is a belief that if you get people up to a pretty high temperature, of course you have to do this very carefully under professional control, that your body will be able to kill more cancer cells and other germs perhaps. Probably useful, but these things seldom just cure problems, period. The best thing is to have a long history of a plant regimen. No matter how old you are, I might be today, start in now. All right. Quick, simple drawing of a cell. And this, I got to be careful about how much I try to cover here this evening. This is a picture clear back in 2000 when they first finished decoding the number, how many rungs there were in the DNA and what the order of these rungs were. And that's where, of course, that's where cancer was going to take place because of a change in the DNA. And I'm going to pass this part up. I forgot that I put this much of it in here because of time. And let's talk about drinking for a minute here. Most of you are not drinkers, probably. Has become a 21st century mantra for how most people view alcohol consumption. When it comes to cancer, there is no amount of what? That is safe. That's the conclusion of the World Cancer Report. Completely trustable organization. It's just not safe. It was declared a carcinogen in 1988 and definitely related to several types of cancer. A quote there, we have long known that alcohol causes esophageal cancer, for example. The relationship with other tumors is not as sure, but very, very likely. The more alcohol that a person drinks, the higher the risk. I'm not going to take much time on this because most of you are not, I won't ask you to raise your hands, but I bet most of you are not users of alcohol. A causal relationship exists between alcohol and cancers in the mouth and all these places that it reaches easily. Multiple myeloma, other cancers of the cervix, vagina, vulva, skin, all kinds of issues with alcohol. And I'm going to pass them up because it's saying more about that idea. The International Association for Cancer Research has labeled alcoholic beverages as carcinogenic to humans, like period. Very, very interesting. It explains in its documents that ethanol, that's what alcohol is that we drink, is metabolized into another chemical and has a genotoxic. What's that? It will kill genes so that other mechanisms involved, including increased oxidative stress, a big word that means it's bad for your body, cause problems in our DNA fixing itself. Now, I have a little section on that I would like to take a few minutes to show you. Let me just try to pass up some stuff here and try to get to that. Well, let's start here. Fat intake and breast cancer mortality. What does it mean when the more of something you have causes the more of something else? We call it a proportion. The more alcohol that's consumed, the higher the death rate in all of these countries from breast cancer. And when the line is straight like that, it just shows you the correlation is as strong as it can get. Here's a place where there's no correlation. Plant fat intake and breast cancer, no correlation. Interesting, wouldn't you say? Yeah, very interesting. Another example, something we call promoters. Promoters of breast, colon, prostate, and pancreas cancers. I think that calls for you, isn't it? You, Mrs. Brackett, okay. The omega-6 fatty acids. I'm sorry I don't have time to tell you what that is. They are powerful promoters of cancer in breast, colon, prostate, and pancreas. This is amazing, friends. And these omega-6 or the N6 oils are found in various places. But if we don't get too much of it, this is only the case when how much of our calories are coming from that fat. Almost half of our calories, see. So this is helpful to understand when we try to limit things. The usual interpretation for a carcinogen, something that causes cancer, is that the effect is proportional to how much you take, and that there's no threshold. No matter how little it is, it starts to cause problems. There's increasing evidence for some limited threshold effect. And what they're talking about here is corn contaminated with a small level of aflatoxin can be a problem, but this is in places overseas where there's so much of it. But in the Western world, the U.S. and other places like us, the cancer from that is low. And so they're saying we can have some of this fat from plants, but we need to be careful that it's not too much. In Africa, a major problem to the appreciable intake of peanuts contaminated with aflatoxin. You've heard about that, I imagine. Very carefully now in this country, it's being avoided, so it's really not too much of an issue. But those are promoters. There's a threshold effect. A tiny amount of something can sometimes be not a problem, like a dose of 1%. But human use of saccharin for almost 90 years, have you ever heard that saccharin is bad for you? Well, it turns out that they can't show that it causes extra bladder cancer. Interesting. I'm not promoting it. I'm just telling you that it's amazing how stuff gets out there. Prostate cancer, second leading cause of death in white men. Leading cause of death in black men. And BPH, I think you've heard of that, benign prostate hypertrophy. What does hypertrophy mean? Larger. Occurs in half of men by the time they're 60, and in 90% of men by the time they're 70. So that happens. 15% of them are diagnosed, who have this hypertrophy, are diagnosed with prostate cancer. And so there's an issue here about our diet in trying to keep this from happening, and what will keep it from happening is a plant regimen that's low in fat. Prostate cancer risk increase with age. We kind of know that. In fact, by the time you're 100, or maybe even 90, 100% of men will have prostate cancer. But it grows so slowly by that time in their body, it's not an issue. So here's the increased risk for breast cancer. Early menarche, we talked about that. First childbirth after 35. If you have kids or grandkids that don't have children, tell them to get busy and have a child. It's a good thing. It's a good thing to that mother to have a child before she's 35. Or if they have no birth children, it's a problem for them with breast cancer. Smaller number of children. More children, the less the risk. It's interesting. In fact, what did God tell Adam and Eve to do when he first created them? Be fruitful and multiply. Family history, of course, you know about that. And hormone replacement therapy can be a problem. Reducing the risk. Healthy diet, high grains, high fruits, high vegetables, very little animal products, adequate folic acid. You all, ladies, I think you know this. When a woman gets pregnant, she should be checked for how much folic acid and that she has enough. It's a very important substance for her. For most women, it's not a problem, but it should be looked at. The number of pregnancies before 30, reducing risk for breast cancer. Breastfeeding itself. Normal weight. We've talked about that already, haven't we? And activity. And alcohol, please, if possible at all, none. And avoid x-rays as far as you can. One thing about x-rays, it's a lot safer today than it used to be because they have been able to make the film, which is no longer film, it's actually like your computer screen when you touch it, very, very sensitive, so they can use much less X radiation, and that's helpful. Even though I don't like them to give, they want to do X-rays left and right, and I try to get them to do fewer. I'm just thinking about passing things up that we've really sort of talked about. Scandinavia, 37% of breast cancer would not grow if nothing was done to treat it. There is no way we presently know to differentiate which is and which not a danger in terms of what you're going to do to treat. So that's a tough one. Because breast cancer is such a big issue, but there's a lot of ways to prevent it, as you know. I'm going to pass this stuff up. Interesting stuff. 250,000 women, 40 and under, in the U.S. are living with breast cancer. It's the leading cause of cancer in deaths of women from 15 on. More than 11,000 young women are diagnosed. What? Brand new every year in this country. By age of 30, a woman has a 1 in 2,000 chance of being diagnosed with breast cancer. And from 30 to 39, she has a 1 in 200 plus chance of being diagnosed. So it's a big issue, and all of these things with plant diets are so useful, low fat. A woman born today has a 1 in 8 chance of getting breast cancer at some point in her life. In other words, an 86% chance that she will not get the disease. And each year, a lot of cases, that's the second paragraph, third paragraph, the most common cancer among African American women, and the second leading cause of cancer deaths among them. So, a lot of challenges, but so easily treatable, friends. Listen to this, done by Colin Campbell. How many of you ever seen the book, The China Study? Good for you. Don't need to talk about it very much. They found that consuming animal-based foods increases the blood level of this growth factor that we're worried about causing cancer to grow. And men can have a very increased risk of advanced stage prostate cancer with this IGF stuff. And where do we get that? Whoops. Animal products. So again, use plants. Boy, this is getting into complex stuff that I don't want to take too much time about. You've seen this before. Dietary cholesterol intake in cancer. Where do we get cholesterol? Only one place. Animal products. This is the largest nationwide study done to assess the association between cholesterol and several types of cancer. Total cholesterol intake was associated with an elevated risk: stomach, colon, rectum, pancreas, lung, breast, testes, kidney, bladder, and NHL. What is that? It'll come to me. A negative association with prostate cancer, interestingly enough. That means less. A clear association with leukemia, no association with cancers of the ovary, testes, or the brain. So, cholesterol, folks, is there any plant that has cholesterol in it? No. So, that whole thing is not an issue as you and I become more and more involved with using just plants. Now let me talk to you very briefly about BRCA1. How many of you have ever heard of BRCA1 or BRCA2? Can I see your hand? These are genes. And now we I'd love to tell you the story, but when this was first discovered, they thought that they found a gene that caused cancer. They were astonished to find out that this gene codes for a protein that repairs the DNA. What's the significance of that? Decrease in cancer, because all cancers are caused by what? Errors in the DNA. That's right. And at first they thought this thing caused cancer. Strangely enough, but they found out before long that it was a tumor suppressor gene or a protein then made using that gene information. And we now have found over 20 tumor suppressor proteins that your body and my body make to protect us from cancer. So it's an amazing thing that God has designed, probably when he made Adam and Eve, even though that was very, very early in mankind's history. A lot of interesting things here. Men and women with these two mutations may be at an increased risk of pancreatic cancer. That is to say, I have a picture of this. I don't know if I have it in this study. Let me just take a quick glance. I don't. But it doesn't matter that you see it. But it's a complicated-looking protein with swirls and curls and long old things. And that protein, which your body makes from the gene that codes for it, gets into your DNA and fixes the mistake. Have you ever heard, I mentioned this the other night, have you ever heard a woman say, I've got the cancer gene? You ever heard that? How many? Let me see your hands, just for interest. Okay, quite a few of you. I know what she means. It's the wrong thing to say. What she means, everybody has the BRCA1 and the BRCA2 and all of the other 30 that we know. Are you all with me? We all have those genes. But for some of us, some of those genes have been mutated. Are you with me on that? So when that lady says, I have the cancer gene, what she really means, even though she probably doesn't know it, is that one of those tumor suppressor genes has been mutated and will not protect her as well as it could if it wasn't mutated. You follow what I'm just described? Now, I don't want to criticize her for not knowing how to say it, but that's what's really going on here. Harmful mutations in those tumor suppressor genes increase the risk for several cancers. These mutations may increase a woman's risk for developing fallopian tube cancer. And this is an older reference. We know of many, look at, there's other tumor suppressor genes that were being discovered. Wonderful idea that that's taking place in our bodies to help protect us. So here's another one, different name. The first one after we found BRCA2 was this one, and now we have scores of them that have been discovered. That when a protein is made from that gene, from using that gene's information, it helps correct the DNA in our bodies. Yes. Yeah, thank you. Well, heredity can be an influence, but the real issue here is that everybody who changes lifestyle from what standard Americans have will see improvements in almost all of these issues. It's just very rare that you don't see improvement. So, unfortunately, some of those things may be promoted by people that are going to make money on it. This is too complicated for us to worry about, but notice that it facilitates DNA repair in damaged, this is a fancy word for cells. And it just is describing here how these tumor suppressor genes, or the proteins that are made so that they're tumor suppressor proteins, are so helpful. Yes, dear? Yes, it's time for you to talk and for me to stop. Is that correct? He said yes. Go ahead, dear. Oh, yes, yes, okay. She wants me to show you what's on the web here. I think I can find it quite quickly. I don't know if I can make this bigger. Go ahead, dear, talk.
That's not the first thing I
Okay, go ahead.
to show you.
Let's get you a microphone.
Just to do this in the right order.
Okay.
That on page 40 in the cookbook, for those of you who got one, for those of you who got one of these cookbooks, on page 40
Put it up here, dear. We can
One.
see it.
is the recipe that we had you sample last night, tofu walnut balls. And I wanted to tell you that the sauce that we put on them, because it says here there's a sweet sour tomato sauce on that same page with those tofu walnut balls. And it's a very nice recipe with you used canned tomatoes and so on and cooked them, and it's
Let me
good.
help you turn it.
But on the previous page, you'll see sweet tomato topping. And that's actually the one we used, which actually in the little print at the bottom of the recipe, either you can use this combination of crushed pineapple, tomato sauce, molasses, and basil and garlic, or if you really want to do the quickest, fastest thing, you can use 2 cups of mild salsa and 1 cup of purchased sugarless grape or apricot jam. You just put those
As a
two.
topping.
Yeah, you just put those 2 things in your, maybe a blender. You could just stir them together, but to make it like what we served last night, we put them in a blender and gave it a real quick twirl. So there's a little bit of chunkiness, but mostly it was just a nice
Smooth.
smooth sauce. And
To put on,
to put on those tofu walnut balls.
okay?
So, from simple to something a little more complex. We just want you to know what you tasted last night. And I really liked the way that one turned out, because Deborah purchased some salsa that was the kind that's in a little carton that's made fresh, and it was called mild. I was a little bit worried it was going to be way too hot. I mean, some people it's okay, you eat hot things, but we just aren't used to that, and I thought it was very nice. All right, so then, was there a question or?
On the screen. You're going to deal with what's on the screen?
Yes,
dear?
but wait, there's one more thing I want to say here about last night. Okay, I guess that was the only thing about last night, and the rest of what I was going to say has to do with tonight, because we're going to have you tasting ice cream, and we made that earlier. Actually, we made it yesterday because we do it in the blender, and you, if you use a high-powered blender, you put in the blender the ingredients for ice cream on page 99 in the cookbook and blend that all up. But if you want to make it into an ice cream that is ready to eat practically because it's been added the ice to it and we add some frozen fruit to it, just like a smoothie, just make it as thick as you can with the frozen fruit and the ice. And then it will freeze quite quickly in a container in the refrigerator. You don't have to put it in some kind of an ice cream making machine or whatever. And it's quite simple to do. And that's how we did it here. We used strawberries in it. But we did use this recipe on page 99.
It's there.
Okay.
Now,
so-
let me say something, dear, quickly, before you go to the chips.
Okay.
If you make ice cream using Neva's recipe, we store it in containers that are about that size, that tall. It won't be like ice cream you get in the store. When you take it out of the freezer, it'll be as hard as a rock. So you put it in the microwave. If it's a container about that size, that high, those little half-quart,
1 pint,
1 pint containers,
2 cups.
it depends on your microwave, but about 45 seconds in the microwave. And then you take it out and with a spoon and you stir it and it'll come just about the thickness of ice cream that you buy normally. So don't be discouraged that it's as hard as a rock, but when you take
It's
it out
because it's very low fat compared to what you buy.
That's right.
So then we're going to also give you samples of the oatmeal raisin cookies in this cookbook here. And that's
You don't need-
in the cookie section.
Yeah.
There's another recipe that is so simple that I usually demonstrate just to help you with something that is very simple for you to make. And that's on page 93. Well, the chewy oatmeal cookies are on page 93. And the other recipe that I love to show people, but we didn't do it for you tonight, is the peanut butter and honey cookies. And just want to
Anybody
recommend
like
that.
peanut butter cookies? Not very many. Well, a few. Okay.
So just want to recommend that you try that recipe. It's very simple to make, and children and husbands love it.
Now, dear,
Okay, now I wanted, because we mentioned our tortilla chips, I wanted to show you, I wasn't able to make them for you. I just want to show you how to make them. And what we do is use, because in the cookbook, it has you using whole wheat tortillas. And when this cookbook was published, those were available. But it's really hard to find now whole wheat tortillas that
made
are made without oil. And so, but
keep talking to it.
the corn tortilla chips are without oil. I mean, the corn tortillas. And I use corn tortillas, as you see in the picture here, and cut them
What we
into
use is
triangles.
Mission Extra Thin. That's the thing to look for. Mission Extra Thin. Go ahead, dear.
Yeah. And those are usually available in a Safeway or even Walmart. You have to look, most of those stores have them where the corn tortillas are. And in this picture here, I'm doing them in a circle over there in that picture on
Wait
the
a minute.
left.
Tell me where you're pointing.
Your arrow is on it.
Okay.
And you can make them fit onto a round pan by putting them, in different directions all around the circle. You can kind of see. And if you want, you can look on my Facebook. I have Neva's Kitchen -7 Secrets on my Facebook page. And there's a number of recipes in there, not in the cookbook, that you can see done.
But the
And
point,
so-
dear, is that you put a 4 or 5 in a stack here, and you slice them like that and make these triangle chips, which you then put on a baking sheet.
Right. And then in that picture down in the corner, can you click on that one?
This one?
Yes. You get them on a pan like that and spray them with water, and then sprinkle salt on them and put them in the oven.
Isn't the water there to make the salt stick?
Yes.
Okay.
Put them in the oven at 350 degrees for about 10 to 12 minutes. It's all in the recipe, in the cookbook, except the cookbook is using whole wheat tortillas, and this is with corn tortillas.
Mission Extra Thin. Can you write that down in your mind? Mission Extra Thin.
And if you look on my Facebook page, you'll see these pictures. It's all in there, plus a few other recipes.
Let me see, dear, if
So,
there's any one of those
that's all
other
I wanted to say.
pictures you want them to see. Whoops, they went away.
Well, I don't know if we have time for that ice cream one.
You're all done.
Yeah, I'm done, but if you
Okay.
had time to go down to the ice cream one, where
Oh.
you're doing that with I don't know if we have time for that or not.
Tell them how to make the ice cream. Just tell them.
Well, I just did.
In the blender,
Yeah. And you add, my recipe is, and it's in the cookbook, it's 1 can of coconut milk, which is not quite 2 cups. If you don't have coconut milk, you can use another kind of milk, like soy milk or almond milk, that you buy. You put that in the blender, add a cup of cashew nuts, raw cashew nuts, and blend that together till it's smooth, and you'll have, if you add just a little more milk, it will give you 3 cups. You don't want any more than 3 cups in your blender of that creamy mix. If you get it too deep in there, when you add the ice, it will never get thick enough. It would never get frozen and thick enough to be a soft ice cream texture.
So is the
It
blender
would
not
be more
yet
like a smoothie, and that's all right, you drink it.
Yeah.
But if you're wanting to make an ice cream that you can eat with a spoon,
Is the blender not yet full if you're going to add
no,
ice?
it's just 3 cups. But then you start adding ice and frozen fruit. I use frozen strawberries or frozen bananas.
Anything. Any
Just
fruit.
like making a smoothie, but you got to make it with lots of frozen fruit or ice until it gets really thick. And if you have just a light, low-powered blender, just use half that much because it won't hold it like a high-powered blender.
It might start smoking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's enough. Do you have any more questions?
Now, it's a lot easier to just buy a bag of chips, isn't it?
Or buy the ice cream already made.
But
When you taste this ice cream, I think you'll think, I'm going to try making that. It's really good.
we'll get them all. Go ahead.
Well, it's fresh frozen. I mean, I freeze it myself. If you have bananas that are getting a little overripe, you just put them in the freezer and in a plastic bag. Or I use strawberries. Of course, we have a garden.
But the
and
point
that's
was-
great, or you can buy them. Yeah,
The
fresh.
reason you want frozen fruit is you're trying to make ice cream and not a soup. And so you put in stuff that's frozen. Yeah, go ahead.
And it's nice to use the sliced frozen strawberries. You can get them all sliced with no sugar. You didn't used to be able to do that, but there's all kinds of really nice combined mixtures of fruit that you can buy that are, just fresh fruit, no sugar, and you can use them, and they're not as hard on your blender if they're chopped up a little bit.
I have some bad news.
Oh,
It's bear season in our neighborhood, and after you and Jim left, we left the door open, and the bear come and ate all that ice cream.
oh, I don't believe it. Because I saw it in the back of the...
Deborah made some more.
But we better get to it pretty soon because it's going to thaw, and we want to have it before it turns into...
Any questions?
Soup.
Yes, go ahead.
How many people, besides myself, have ever watched the video on YouTube, Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead? How many? Somebody's
I've
watched
seen
it.
it.
So I juiced for 6 solid months because one of my coworkers does it, and they do exactly the diet that you're talking about. They juice. What happened to me was, besides the fact that I'm diabetic, is my energy level fell to flat 0 about 4 years ago. So I decided to start juicing, and I did it religiously for 6 months. Well, a lot of things happened. My energy level came back. I felt better than I've ever felt in a long time, et cetera, et cetera. But then I started going downhill again. Well, I found out that I had to have my gallbladder out because my gallbladder was very, very bad, and I had gallstones and everything else. They got that out, and I finally got over that. I'm 68. And so I went back to juicing, but I'm not doing it as well as I should be right now. But that really worked well for me.
The fat, sick, and nearly dead is an interesting situation. You don't need to use that system. You just need to eat plants, and you get the same result. So yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, machination is an important thing. So it would be
Chewing,
better
in
to
other
just,
words.
get food and eat it rather than making juices of everything. But it's not, I don't think it's a
Yeah,
big issue.
It's not a bad thing.
Not a big issue.
It's wonderful
Yeah.
that you've had
I'm
the
glad that you did
results
it.
that you did.
Amen. Anybody else before we close?
Oh,
Let's
hands.
start here, there, and there. Go ahead. Oh, there's no issue of our bodies having changed to digest something better or not, just because of the history. Other things can happen. There can be mutations from all kinds of things, but not because of a culture. It's true that some cultures eat mostly rice and some this and that, but it doesn't matter what food you pick. If it's a plant, it'll make you well. A variety is a good idea, but you could actually get well on just eating one plant, interestingly enough. But we always say a variety would be better. The whole issue is a plant instead of animal stuff.
When you say a plant, you would include,
When I say a plant,
Fruit
I mean
from-
plant regimen.
but a fruit off of a tree is
Well, that's a
not-
plant.
Okay.
Isn't the fruit off a tree a
Well,
plant?
that does confuse some people.
Oh, okay. All right. Who's next? Oh, yes.
I have celiac sprue, so I cannot have wheat, barley, rye, or derivatives thereof. A lot of the recipes call for wheat.
Yes.
Can I
and,
substitute, is there something I can substitute?
Well, I was going to mention that, like last night, the tofu walnut balls, we did use breadcrumbs in that. A lot of times instead will use quinoa, where it says 2 cups of breadcrumbs. I use 2 cups of cooked quinoa. And that, because they're kind of when they're cooked, they can be a little bit dryish and be like breadcrumbs. And then you add maybe about a half cup of flax to that recipe so that it will help it to hold together and not be too soft from the quinoa. And that makes a really nice tofu, a nice ball.
Okay.
Or you could use some gluten-free bread instead. And for the
But
cookies,
aren't you allergic to wheat?
Wheat, barley, rye, and
Yeah.
derivatives
So she
thereof.
couldn't just use gluten-free bread.
right,
Just,
well, so yeah, you have to watch your labels. But a lot of these recipes, you can substitute other grains. Like you could can you use oatmeal?
yes.
Okay, most of these cookies, you could just use the oatmeal instead of putting some wheat in there too. Or else, if I was just using oatmeal and no wheat, I might also use some maybe tapioca flour or corn starch flour to help to bind them, or flax. You have to play around with your ingredients. You probably already have learned that.
I've
So,
played around with a whole lot of them. It doesn't always taste good. Sometimes it doesn't
Yeah,
turn out
I
very well,
know.
but yeah,
We
it's
have
a
our
lot of
recipes.
experimenting.
Yeah.
Can I use the gluten-free flours for some of that
Oh,
stuff?
yes, gluten-free flour.
Instead of the wheat?
Yes, and I've done that a lot
Okay.
too, but I didn't have that when we made these cookies today. This is sort of a last-minute idea that we put together.
Before the bears came. One more. Where was it? Back here.
Yes.
You have so much success with your way of eating. I have your cookbook. I've had it for years. I think that's wonderful. What do you think about lectins? And what do you think about what Dr. Stephen Gundry is teaching about that?
I'll let Jim answer that.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with what he is teaching.
He's teaching about the dangers of eating lectins and how it destroys the intestines.
Lectins that are in the plants.
Yes.
False. Unless somebody's, allergic or has a unique issue. If it's a plant, it's fine to eat. If it's an edible plant, it's fine to eat, irrespective of lectin, etc. They're out there all, it's crazy. In the end, they're trying to make some money. And they sound, you know what? They sound like they know what they're talking about. People say that about me, but it doesn't matter if they sound like they know what they're talking about. But yeah, don't worry about that. If it's a plant, unless it's toxic, here and there, a person can have a toxicity for a certain plant. You're not looking at me anymore, so I'm not sure you heard what I said. Any particular person might develop a problem with a certain plant, so of course you don't want to eat that. But man, there's so many different plants out there that you can choose from. It doesn't need to be an issue for you. Me too.
And I also wanted to say that
But we don't make 'em.
our ingredients were a little limited when we decided to make these cookies, and we used some brown sugar in them. But you can use, I like coconut sugar as a, maybe more simple,
But dear, she was
unrefined
just talking
product.
about chocolate chips.
I know, I'm just telling you that you can vary these things and,
But what's she going to use in place of
in
chocolate
place
chips?
of chocolate chips. I don't know of anything to use in place of chocolate chips except raisins or craisins, Carob chips. Yes,
Carob
you can
can be
use
a problem
carob chips, but they are made
With
with a
oil.
high amount of oil.
Yeah.
And so that's why I stay away from them. But maybe once in a while you put some in when you're making them for a special occasion. I wouldn't,
No, don't start down that road. Pretty soon it's always
Yeah.
a special occasion.
Excuse me, I shouldn't have said that. I don't know of anything else. Yes, you can use cocoa and carob, which is a nice cocoa-like tasting powder for cookies. I like carob because it's sweeter. Cocoa is a little bit bitter if it's plain without, in its natural state.
Well, dear, if they're going to buy and eat carob, they need to read the label because sometimes the carob is produced with oil.
Well,
They make something and it's carob, but it's got oil in it. Oil added to it.
if it's a candy type thing
Well,
like carob chips, but
what-
carob powder is just
Plain.
plain. It doesn't have oil in it.
Well, don't be discouraged, folks. It takes time, but it can be done. And even I've been living like this for 58 years, and people love her food, so it can be done. It's extra work, maybe, but worth it.
Yeah, and I think we better go back there and taste that
Well,
ice
let's
cream
go back
before
and
it
eat that
melts.
stuff.
For some reason, oh, there we go. Listen, we really appreciate all you coming to these here. And now you came, you listened, and you're probably not like me. I can memorize all this stuff. But, and the test is a test. It begins tonight. But we have some cheat sheets, don't we? Don't you have a website? I know you're on YouTube, but for a lot of these programs, they can look up and look. So, and you'll be grading your own self. Wait a couple of months and go to the doctor or get all your vitals checked and see if they're any better. If they're not, that means you get setback and you got to go through this again. So, but anyway, now you're learning all this stuff, but what you going to do with it? I mean, I said in the beginning, we, as Seventh-day Adventists, believe in a healthy lifestyle. So don't just keep it to yourself. We consider everybody in our territory here in Carson City. Go tell it to your friends. And they can get on YouTube and they can get on different things and see these same programs. We're interested in having a healthy society, and that's our point of doing these meetings. Then we will have another series starting 2 weeks from this coming Tuesday, or not this coming Tuesday, the following week, and it'd be on, kind of like you always said, it's not how old you are. It's not how old you are that makes you feel bad. It's your energy is gone. And these videos They're about 30-minute videos, and they'll be running here at the church starting at 7 o'clock. Not this coming Tuesday, but the next one. And we invite you to come watch those. It will teach you how to get your energy back through healthy ways. So you're welcome for that. And now once again, I want to thank you for being here. And don't be selfish. Don't hide this information. And give yourself a test. If you fail, go back, do it again. Well, let's have a closing prayer, and I'll close it. And this, dear Father, we thank you for the opportunity to present this here in this town. And just pray that we all will work better on getting closer to our diet so we can get closer to you, Father. These things I ask in Jesus' name. Amen. And good night.